Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Bryan Post. So Bryan was introduced to me by David Durovi, who's been on the podcast. So check out his old episode in the back catalogue. Bryan, welcome to the show. Thank you very much. I'm so delighted that David introduced us to. You're a real your heart is huge, my friend. So I'm sure we're in for a great conversation today.
Thank you, Simon. It's my pleasure and great honor to be able to come and share with you and with your audience.
Yeah. So could you share a little bit about yourself, Bryan?
Sure. Where do you want me to start?
Start by. I know you're a man of many parts. You've got all these different gigs going on, all these different. So maybe focus in on the work that you do with parents.
Okay, so currently I am the clinical director of an organization called Adoption Clinical Services, and we provide what is called wraparound support services to at-risk adoptive families. I've pretty much specialized in adoption and foster care almost my entire career, which is almost 25 years. So in this instance, we serve about 60 families, covers about 13 different counties in Northern California. And these are families where the adoption itself is at risk because of the stress and the behavioral challenges in the home with the family. And so we go in as a kind of last ditch effort to secure the placement and keep the child from being sent to a group home or to residential treatment center.
Yeah. The last ditch stuff. So this is tough. This is tough stuff that you're working on, Bryan.
Oh, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. In fact, I don't even think I was thinking about the podcast this morning, but I was thinking about one of our little kiddos that we're going through this process with him, and it's heartbreaking. And I've told people before, people don't get into this work with the expectation that they're going to have their hearts broken, but it is par for the course.
Yeah. So if parents are listening and they're struggling, what would you like to share with them to make sure that the situation doesn't deteriorate, that they're listening to this podcast today is the start of a brighter future?
Well, Simon, I'm going to start off by telling your parents that there's always hope, that they're in a tough place right now for one reason. Well, actually, it's two reasons. They're in a tough place right now because of stress and because of fear. That is the reason you are in the place that you're in right now. It has become conditioned because it has gone on for 6 months or longer. You've struggled, and the struggle has become more normal than the relaxed state. That is those two reasons, stress and fear, are the reasons that you're in the place that you're in right now. What I will also say is that it is not about blame. It is not about placing the blame on your child. It is not about placing the blame on you. It is about finding the solutions to growth and deeper understanding and greater relationship. And that comes through a shared responsibility of every individual in the family. It doesn't matter if your child was adopted. It doesn't matter if your child experienced trauma. This child with this immature brain depends on the adults around them to provide a new environment to shape and mold their brain different than how it is already set up. Mental health professionals started years ago talking about children are resilient. That is bullshit. Children are not resilient. They don't just bounce back. Trauma changes the brain. Bruce Perry stepped in and said children are malleable. The brain is malleable. That's more accurate because the brain can change. The brain can be remolded, but it takes repetition. It takes repetition and it takes positive relationship. And it has to happen. And that doesn't mean just because you do something once or 100 times or 1,000 times doesn't mean that that's enough. Just because you show up in a positive way once or 100 times or 1,000 times, that doesn't mean it's enough. And the thing is, it doesn't mean you're not doing enough. It just means your child has their own process for healing. Their brain has to go through a process of healing. And parents have been sold a bill of goods thinking that a medication or a diagnosis is what's going to fix their kid. It is the most despicable thing that has ever occurred in any kind of science to condition parents. And we do this on a larger scale just with pharmaceutical medications in general, but to condition parents to believe that a pill is what's going to fix their child. And as soon as that happens, as soon as your child gets a pill, as soon as your child receives a diagnosis, I go beyond just the medication. Let's talk about the diagnosis too. As soon as your child receives a diagnosis, that child just got scapegoated. That child just became the identified problem, and that is the problem. The problem is that we're wanting to focus all the blame on the child, but the child is the victim. The child is the one who's come from the trauma. But even greater than that is that the parents were children too, and 9.9 times out of 10, they've experienced their own trauma. And so what you end up with is a family full of traumatized individuals. But the mental health profession wants to place all the onus and all the focus on the child. And it is terrible. It is terrible. It is terrible. It is terrible because it leaves parents feeling helpless. It leaves parents feeling not good enough. And it grows children up feeling like they are no good. Like they are no good, that they are unlovable, that they cannot trust. And then what happens is they have to learn to defend themselves against all of that negativity. And then in that process of learning to defend themselves against all that negativity, they callous their hearts over for a lifetime. Their hearts get calloused over for a lifetime. And these challenges that we have with children when they're 5 and when they're 10 and when they're 15, these are just moments in time. These children will become adults who have to live the rest of their life based on how we have blueprinted them for relationship. How we as adults have blueprinted them for a relationship. They have to live with that the rest of their lives, and they have to contend with that the rest of their lives. And most of them just aren't going to be able to figure it out because society is going to continue to perpetuate this belief that they are broken and that they are unlovable and they can't trust and relationships are no good.
Wow. I promised you listeners that this was going to be a ride, you know. I think for me, the things that come up there is that you talk about people, you're talking about both parties being stuck. You're talking about the kid being stuck and you're talking about the parents being stuck.
Well, so, and then the mental health professionals stuck too.
Oh, the mental health.
Because they're too afraid because of their own issues to help the parents confront their issues, so the parents can more effectively help the kid confront their issues. So it's really just a big, nasty cycle.
Yeah. So everybody's wading through treacle and wondering why they're not getting anywhere.
That's it. That is the nature of child-focused mental health.
Yeah. And they call it mental health, but most of the time they seem to be fixated on mental disease to me.
100%. The entire focus and the problem, the problem, challenge, whatever you want to call it, is because we live in a fear-based society. We live in a fear, because we live in a fear-based society. We are always operating from a place of survival. From a place of survival, you're always oriented towards power and control. So anything that shows up that is a threat, that presents a threat, and there's threats all over every single day, every encounter, everything that shows up as a threat. And in this instance, it's children's behaviors, whether it's rolling their eyes or talking back, or it's running away or kicking a hole in a wall. Everything shows up as a threat. And then what happens, because we are not aware of our own fear, because it is such a conditioned pattern of how we operate in the world from the government down. When we perceive a threat, we immediately constrict into survival, and we operate from power and control, because power and control gives us the false illusion that we can make ourselves safe. It's not even about the kids, but we have grown up and become conditioned with these false concepts, this false conception that what we are doing is for the best interest of the children, which is bullshit. What we're doing has nothing to do for the best interest of the children. What we are doing is trying to create safety for ourselves. And that goes all the way back to the mental health professional who takes the kid from the parents. Number one, takes the kids from the parents. Number two, doesn't ever even see the home, takes the kid out of the home into this office, into this little room with all these safe, secure toys, and then tries to figure out with this child how they can do better to navigate this crazy, insane world. How insane is that? Well, that's because the mental health professional has their own fears about dealing with parents. They have their own unconscious fears about dealing with parents. They don't want to talk to dad about his trauma history and the way he was parented. And they don't want to dig deep into his birth. And they don't want to ask mom about her birth and about her siblings and about her physical abuse. And they don't want to talk about dad about his sexual abuse. They're just freaked out. They're freaked out and scared, and they've been educated in these universities that are just focused on cognitive behavioral therapy, which comes nowhere close to addressing trauma. And then what they do is they go in with this professionalism, and they just focus on the child, which is just a continued reinforcing of the negativity that exists. And that's why children in traditional mental health settings, and you could interview 100 of your families, and 90 of them are going to tell you that their children have not gotten better, they've just gotten older, and nothing changed along the way. They probably had, on average, I co-founded with my partner, who was my wife at the time, who still runs the Post Institute. In 2000, we formed a online educational resource called the Post Institute. And the Post Institute was based around my lectures and my books and everything else. And we would go, I was traveling, and I traveled all over the world, and I'd go live with families for 3 days at a time and just dig into all of the trauma. I always started with the parents, because the parents are the foundation of healing. If you do not help empower the parents, you are doing nothing. You're doing nothing. Now, I say that because we all know that relationship is the most important thing, and a therapist can have a great relationship with a child, but if you just send that child back into a stressed out, dysfunctional home, you are doing them no good. You are doing them a disservice. And you don't have to do this work for very long to see how many institutions that exist that take children out of the home and medicate them and diagnose them and do all these other kinds of things for sometimes 2-3 years at a time, and then send them back to the same broken home, and the child is not home for any period of time. We recently had a social worker stepped up and she said, this teenage girl just got out of 3 years of a treatment center, and mom doesn't want her to come home. Mom wants her to go to another treatment center, but I am unwilling to just send this child to another treatment center until mom at least attempts to make this work. How many social workers exist how many social workers are there that will do that will have that kind of courage to say to a parent, no, we're not going to do that. Right? You don't give the parents a fighting chance. And now it's been almost a year. This child's still been at home. She's back home. She's back home. She's getting a chance to feel what it means to be normal. Although mom has tremendous amount of issues, and she's a social worker, which is the worst. I mean, over the duration of my career, the people I never really wanted to work with were psychologists and social workers and psychiatrists, some of the craziest people in the world.
So are too many adoptive parents putting their faith in these people that are too crazy? Is that what you're saying?
Well, you know what, and you know where craziness comes from. Einstein said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing, expecting a different outcome. Well, where does insanity come from? Insanity comes from a stressed out amygdala, a prolonged, overwhelming, unpredictably cortisol expressing amygdala that's always in a state of fear. Insanity comes from a prolonged state of stress and fear. And we have become so conditioned to doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. We don't ever stop and say, this is not working. And so parents show up because they don't have anywhere else to go. They don't know what else to do. They go to these professionals expecting to get help. But these professionals have gone on sometimes years doing the same thing, expecting a different result. And so the parents who are already stressed out and scared and overwhelmed just get sucked right back into a vortex of the same paradigm of stress, fear, and control. And this is nothing I talk about is this is all, it's very simple, Simon, but it's not easy. This work that I do and the way I try to work with parents from a perspective of their own understanding of stress and fear and their children's understanding of stress and fear. I mean, it's very, very simple. It's not easy though. And it doesn't mean that just because and again, I've been doing this my entire career, for almost 25 years. This is all I've done. This is all I've specialized in, is that I was adopted. I was born in trauma. I grew up in a home that was traumatized. I had a sister who was born in trauma and grew up in the same home. This has been my entire life. I know this work inside and out, inside and out. And I will tell you that I can sit down with a family and we can spend a duration of time and they can really want to try to get this, but really struggle. And that's okay, because the struggle is a part of the growing process. It's the parents that are willing to struggle and keep showing up and keep trying that ultimately make all the difference. Right? But you have to be given at least an opportunity to have some contrast against what mainstream society says and believes. And 20 years ago, I think it was almost 20 years ago, it had to have been at least 15 years ago, I co-authored a book called Beyond Consequences, Logic, and Control. It was the first book of its kind for adoptive families. And Sir Richard Bowlby, who's still a very dear and near friend, who's there across the pond with you guys. He's the son of John Bowlby, the father of attachment. He did the foreword for us. And it had a tremendous impact. People did not like that because, number one, you have this pseudo luminary, although he's not really a scientist. He's just kind of continued to perpetuate his father's work. But they had wanted to associate his father's attachment theory with some of the dysfunctional, distorted therapeutic work that they were doing. And bless his heart, he just wants to be out there and keep supporting. And then we write this book, and it's a complete paradigm shift to everything else that was out there at the time. This was 15, 16, 17 years ago.
Yeah. So interesting word, paradigm, because just before we started recording, I read you that quote that I'd seen in the paper. So this was for the listeners. This is the guy that wrote Gulliver's Travels. Vision is the art of seeing what is invisible to others. So this is about seeing things differently. You're talking about a paradigm shift.
Yes, a paradigm being the way you see the world. So 100%.
What is the paradigm? Because we live in this world that's obsessed with strategies, but not so interested in the way that we see things.
No, it's not a world that's obsessed with strategies. It's a world that is mired in fear. See, the underneath the obsession with the strategies is the conditioned fear reaction. We live in a stressed out, fear-based world. And it is the stress and the fear that drives us to try to find the strategies in order to control and change the behaviors. The root is in the stress and the fear. And until we can master our own stress and fear, not even master it, just become aware of it. Just become aware of our own stress and fear in the presence of a child's stress and fear, which is rooted in their trauma, which they have every right for, but it's that stress and fear that drives their behavior. Until we can become aware and present of our own stress and fear in the moment of our children's stress and fear, we cannot help them transform that in any positive way. And the other side of stress and fear is love. It is love. And until we can overcome our own stress and fear and move into a space of love and hold a space of love and come back to a space of love and model love over and over and over and over again, even when we get frustrated and even when we get stressed, because remember, that's automatic. That's automatic, but we have to get better and better and better at recognizing it and breathing through it and shifting back into that energy, that vibration, that emotion of love without trying to change and control our children who are in a state of stress. The problem is we get stressed out when our children are stressed out. Now think about that. Think about that. If your child is stressed out and acting out, if anytime your child is acting out, they are stressed out. And I also believe they are regressed, which means they are actually coming from a deeper emotional age, which has nothing to do with the parents, nothing at all. But every time that child is acting out, which means they're stressed out, which means they're regressed, that is a representation of how their brain is experiencing the world. That is a representation of how their pathways are firing. That is a representation of what's stored in their brainstem that is now being triggered. It's like post-traumatic stress disorder. Now think about this. If every time a child moves into a place of post-traumatic stress experiencing, the parents or the mental health professional or the teacher or the worker in the residential treatment center or the group home, they too move into a place of post-traumatic stress experiencing. Who can ever teach the child's brain anything different? They can't. It's neurologically and physiologically impossible. Simon, is that complicated?
No.
That is not complicated. It is very simple. It is very simple. But the problem is that post-traumatic stress experiencing is a badass experience. It is a terrifying experience. I know you've probably experienced it, but for a grown man, for a grown man in a moment's time to feel like he is a helpless 8-year-old boy again, who's watching his stepfather sexually abuse his sister and making him feel that same overwhelm, that same helplessness that's being triggered by his 12-year-old son 20 years later, 30 years later. That's the kind of stuff we're talking about. That's why it is not easy. But that is the work. That's the real work. If we don't do that real work, everything else is just bullshit.
So this is clearly a very in-depth, upfront experience that you're doing with parents. And here we are just having this conversation, right? So what can you share in that? What can you share in a conversation to help parents deal with this stuff? Given we're just having a conversation, we're not doing this.
Listen to this.
Full on.
Listen to this. I'm going to make it so simple. All behavior arises from a state of stress. In between the behavior and the stress is the presence of a primary emotion. There are only two primary emotions, love and fear. It's through the expression, the processing, and the understanding of the fear that you calm the stress and diminish the behavior. All behavior. So here's the first struggle. Here's the first struggle. And this is what the fear-based brain does. So every encounter unconsciously parents have with what I say is rooted in fear. The very first struggle is the parent who says, "Well, I don't think that's stress and fear. I just think he's doing it because he wants to do it." That's the very first problem you're going to have. If you're stuck at that kindergarten level, energetically, you're probably never going to get what I'm preaching to you. What I'm asking people to do, what I'm asking adults to do, is I am asking you to calm down, breathe, and listen to what 25 years and all kinds of neuroscience research, all kinds of physiologic research, all kinds of personal life experience is telling you. We've sold over 500,000 copies of my book, From Fear to Love. Parenting difficult adopted children. All I'm asking parents to do is slow down, stop the initial resistance, because the initial resistance will lead you astray. It will never get you any further. And listen to what I'm saying. All behavior arises from a state of stress. When your child is acting out, see, I feel it. I feel the resistance. I feel the resistance energetically. Even as I say it, I feel it. And I need parents to, you have to become aware of that. You have to become mindful of that resistance at the very beginning. When your child is acting out, it is because he is stressed out. He is stressed out. And if he is stressed out, then he has gone beyond his neurophysiologic window for how much stress he can handle. He can no longer operate within a window of tolerance. And if that is true, now in Alan Shore, who wrote a book called Affect Regulation and the Origin of the Self, he wrote 3 volumes. I call him the John Bowlby of our times. He kind of came along in the 90s during the decade of the brain. He wrote this book. In the introduction of this book, he quotes Taylor et al., 1997, as saying, "It is believed that affect dysregulation," which I call being stressed out, not just being stressed. Stress is normal, being stressed out. It is believed that affect dysregulation is a fundamental mechanism involved in all psychiatric disorders. It is believed that affect dysregulation is a fundamental mechanism involved in all psychiatric disorders. If that is true, Simon, if that is true, if it is true, and I know it to be true, but I like for everyone else to have the window and the space to say, yeah, it could be true, it could not be true. If it is true, then that means that being stressed out is the fundamental cause of all psychological, all physical, all cognitive, all spiritual. It's the root of all of it. And if it's the root of all of it, then what do we need to do? What's the first thing we need to do? If it's true, what's the first thing we need to do? Bruce Perry says we're biologically engineered to be in relationship. Well, stress causes us to move into survival, which moves us out of relationship. So if affect dysregulation is a fundamental mechanism involved in all psychiatric disorders, what's the first thing we need to do? Reduce the stress. And where does that start? It starts with us. It starts with us. So when I say to parents, all behavior stems from a state of stress. And in between the behavior and stress is the presence of a primary emotion. There are only two. So now this is the next resistance the parent has. What do you mean there's only love and fear? My child's angry. My child's defiant. My child's obstinate. Stop. You're just looking for ways to reinforce your own fear brain. Breathe and calm down and listen. It's like I have a friend, actually one of my business partners, I'll say, stop and just feel the cool breeze coming down off the mountaintop and just washing right over you. Just take it in, because what I'm telling you is truth. There are only two primary emotions, love and fear. It's all you're struggling against in any given moment. In any given moment, the only struggle is the struggle to love or the struggle to be in fear. In any given moment, that's it. I'm going to go this morning. I'm going to go to a school with a mom. I'm going to go pick a mom up, a new adopted mom. I'm going to go pick her up and we're going to go to her school and we're going to request a copy of her child's individual education plan, because they did not allow her to have any input into this individual education plan, which is it's a federal document. It's a federal document, and it's the only power that parents have. They didn't allow her to have any input, and they're just going to force this child, her 13-year-old adopted son, they're just going to force him through this process, which has already been a disaster. And that's what the fear brain does. The fear brain says, if something's not working, just do more of it. The fear brain can't stop and think about doing something different, because the fear brain operates from power and control. And so that's what happens to parents and kids in school is you get all these professionals with all these credentials, and they're all just fearful, and they hide behind these credentials and their professional status, and they just overpower parents because they can't stop and slow down and come to the realization that what you're doing is not working. You must do something different. It's so hard for them to hear anything else. But it's so interesting that I can talk to a group of 10 professionals who are adamant about the way a child is or what needs to happen initially. But then as soon as I help them understand the child's trauma, as soon as I help them understand the child's fear, as soon as I help them understand the way that things have been working are just making it worse, it's like light bulbs come on, but they're like flickers. I turned on my light over my sink this morning and it flickered and then it went out. Well, that's what happens. It flickers, and that's what happens in the amygdala. I don't even think it's in the amygdala. I think it's somewhere in the hypothalamus, which is where oxytocin, our brain's anti-stress hormone, is released. I think what happens when someone hears some truth, when they hear some hope, when they hear something that's faithful, they have a flickering of oxytocin in their brain because it feels good. But then it doesn't take long for it to just go out, because oxytocin is a learned response in the brain, whereas your cortisol reaction is automatic. Your oxytocin is learned. Your brain's anti-stress hormone. Think about that. Your brain's anti-stress hormone, the production of your brain's anti-stress hormone is learned. If you're not taught by other people, you don't get it. So I come all the way back to All behavior stems from a state of stress. In between the behavior and the stress is the presence of primary emotion, love and fear. And here's what parents have to do. They have to first realize that when their child is acting out, it's because they're stressed out. And the second thing they have to realize right behind that is they have to realize that their acting out child that is acting out from a place of stress causes them stress, causes the parent stress. And the first thing I need to do, the most important thing I need parents to do, is I need them to stop in that moment. I need them to stop in that moment. I need them to take 3 to 10 deep breaths. See, in the stress brain, in the moment, you feel like you are going to die. See, that's like the third resistance point. The third resistance point is the parent who goes, I can't stop and breathe. They're yelling. I can't stop and breathe. They're going to break something. I can't stop and breathe. They're going to run away. I can't stop and breathe. They're not getting up and doing what I tell them to do. It's the stress brain. It's the stress brain. And the stress brain is the enemy. You have to be able to stop and breathe through that stress brain so you as the parent can have a fighting chance to have a different repetition and a different impact in what your child is experiencing. Because if you do not, you cannot teach your child's brain any different. They cannot learn. A child's brain cannot learn anything different than what adults model to them. And in order for us to teach children to be responsible, we must first be willing to take responsibility. One of the worst things in the world that's ever been taught to parents is the concept of consequences. It's the absolute worst. The parents are always, a consequence is nothing more than another vehicle of power and control. Well, I got to give them a consequence for their behavior. No, you don't. You have to understand that their behavior is coming from a place of stress, and then you have to figure out how to take responsibility to teach them something different. That's what you have to do. Forget consequences. That whole parenting movement came from a couple of dysfunctional professionals. It's not good. And then we say, well, I can give my biological child a consequence and they learn from it. It has nothing to do with the consequence. It has everything to do with the fact that your biological child has a brain that can contend with stress. Adopted children's brains can't contend with stress the same way. So what you can get away with, it's not even what you do, it's what you get away with your biological child. And I don't think it's any better. What you get away with a biological child or a child who hasn't experienced a great amount of trauma is that child has the ability to contend with, they have a stronger window of tolerance to deal with stress. You're not doing anything different as a parent. You're doing the same fear-based control stuff that you've always done. So I call it, it becomes the reactive parenting, which is your timeout, your behavior modification, and your consequences, and your medication, and your diagnosis, and your restraint. That's reactive, your points and rewards. That's reactive parenting. It's reactive teaching, right? All it is doing is waiting for a child to do something wrong. Well, if all you're doing is sitting around waiting for a child to do something wrong, then all you're doing is sitting around waiting for them to get stressed out so you can punish them, which reinforces the stress.
Wow.
And so when I say to the parent, the first thing you got to do is you got to take 3 to 10 deep breaths. The reason I'm saying that is because Joseph Ledoux, this is the thing. There is nothing that I'm going to tell a parent, number one, that I haven't done myself, and number two, that I can't back up with some kind of neuroscientific, physiologic information, some kind of research. I will back it up. Joseph Ledoux, the author of The Emotional Brain, he's a New York University neuroscience scientist. He said, listen to this. This is beautiful. This is beautiful. This is beautiful as the affect dysregulation. In times of stress, our thinking becomes confused and distorted and our short-term memory is suppressed. Oh my God, listen to that.
There's so much truth there.
When we are stressed out, we are no longer thinking clearly. And the problem, Simon, is we become stressed out in a moment's time. And as soon as we become stressed out and we're not thinking clearly, our short-term memory shuts off. And that's why in one moment you can be loving towards someone, and the next moment you think they're the devil because of stress. So that's what parents can do very simply. If you do nothing else, I'm going to save you 10 years of therapy. If you do nothing else, teach yourself to breathe in the presence of your child's misbehavior, and teach yourself to see that their behavior is coming from stress and fear, and challenge yourself to reduce the stress and fear in the moment. And sometimes you need to just leave it alone. If you do nothing else, I will save you 10 years of psychotherapy and counseling just by doing that. Just seeing the stress and the fear and learning how to calm your own stress and fear in the presence of your child's negative behavior.
So it's all about us.
It's all about us. It's human. We're biologically engineered to be in relationship. We have to model to the child's brain whatever we want them to learn. That's why you go to school. You go to school and you sit in a desk, and the teacher writes on the whiteboard, the little chalkboard, over and over and over and over again, experiences and exercises to model learning. So why would parenting be anything different? That requires repetition.
Not resisting.
You know what? Resistance is the name of the game. It's the thing that we have to overcome the greatest. But the key to overcoming resistance in any given moment is to stop and breathe. Slow your brain down. There's nothing to resist. There's nothing to resist in a state of love. There's nothing to resist. There's nothing to resist in love. Nothing. The only reason we resist is because we move into survival. There's nothing to resist. No one is going to die. No one is going to die. And Simon, I tell you that, I've been saying that for 20 years, but I had a dear friend recently who was in the throes of a mental health crisis, and the police, and he was the sweetest man, and the police surrounded him, and he had a knife, and he was a big black man, he had a knife, and they surrounded him, he had guns, and he put the knife down, and he said, y'all are focusing on the knife, but it's not about the knife. He said, y'all have y'all's guns, and all they were focused on was the knife. They wanted him to move away from the knife because they were stressed out and scared. Why did they not move away from him? Why did they not move away from him? Obviously, the man is not in his right brain. But they focused on the behavior, and he eventually went for the knife and lunged and got shot and killed. When I say to people, you are not going to die, you have to calm that stressed brain, because there ain't nothing your kid is doing in any given moment that is going to cause them to die. And I've been doing this for 25 years, and I've worked with some crazy freaking kids. I've worked with some crazy freaking adults. And ain't nothing happening in any given moment that anyone's going to die. And that kid may punch through a window and cut his arm up. I've had kids take shards of glass and cut themselves. I've had kids take off running down the road. I mean, I've seen it all. No one is going to die in the moment. But in that moment, if you cannot calm your stress and fear, and you're just operating sheerly from power and control, that's when bad things happen. Bad things don't happen when you move into a space of love. Bad things could happen, but you have so much greater opportunity to maintain relationship and help a child work through trauma when you can just calm yourself down and hold a presence of love. There's so much more power there, and parents can find so much more peace in their relationship when they with their child, when you realize your child is not fighting against you, your child is fighting within themselves. They're not fighting against you, they're fighting within themselves. We always talk about telling parents, don't take it personal. Well, it's hard to not take something personal because of the amygdala. The amygdala is what causes you to take things personally, because the amygdala sees the behavior as a threat. Therefore, it becomes very personal because you think you are at risk, but you are not at risk. You are not at risk. And if you can calm that stress brain, you can realize in that moment that you are not at risk.
Is this what people talk about? You know, the fact that we think that we're under attack. The amygdala thinks the amygdala's sense is there to keep us safe from the tiger and help us run away. Sorry, I'm not. You know, you clearly.
Yeah, that's it. That's goes back to the caveman days when the caveman saw the saber-toothed tiger sitting up on the branch, and science always told us that the brain goes into fight or flight. So either the caveman's going to fight the tiger or he's going to flee. Well, the reality is that there's a third response or third reaction, which is actually the initial reaction, which is to freeze. We freeze first, and then we determine whether we fight or we flee. And so what happens with parents when children are misbehaving or acting out or starting to escalate, they freeze first. Now that initial freeze, if the parent has their own trauma, causes their body to go automatically into a state of shock. So they automatically go into overwhelm. Now they're in their post-traumatic stress experiencing, right? So now their thinking is already hijacked. This is the parent's thinking that's hijacked. This is the parent's physiology that's hijacked. Now you got two people that are completely hijacked. The parent has to be able to breathe through that initial freeze state, relax their brain, dial down some of that cortisol, dial down their energy and their vibration, and be able to think clearly and realize in that moment your child's not going to kill you.
So the parents think that the children's going to attack them.
Yeah. Oh, all the time. The parents feel like they're at risk in the moment, and it has nothing to do with the kid. That has to do with the parent's history, right? If a parent has whatever is showing up in a family, whatever energetic experience is showing up in a family, whatever behavior a child is showing up in a family with that is creating stress is also directly tied into the parent's own past experience, because we don't perceive things as a threat unless we've had a direct experience with them. It's just the perception is based on the historical way the brain functions. So the child shows up with a behavior and a vibration. We don't perceive that as a threat unless we've had a direct experience with that same vibration. That's how we react against one another, because we've had shared experiences. And so we don't realize that a child, when they're showing up with their experience and we're getting overwhelmed by our experience, we're just creating more overwhelm. That's why two parents don't get worked up over the same thing. One parent can be like, oh, he's okay, and the other parent is losing their mind because it ties into shared experience.
So to put it ultra simple, and I'm seeing a lot of stuff from my past here. The child is stressed. The parent thinks that they are under attack, and if that triggers an old memory of a previous attack, then they go on the attack.
Yeah, so the child's stressed and the parent gets stressed.
So that's kind of like a vortex that's going to leave us. Yeah,
it's a negative feedback loop. Because Daniel Goleman talked about this with emotional intelligence, is that the amygdala start communicating to one another.
So this is like a fight in a pub between.
Yeah, absolutely,
where it just it escalates. Yeah, the negative feedback loop escalates.
Yes.
So what we're talking here is you said about breathing through the attack.
Mm-hmm. The perceived attack.
Yeah, sorry. Breathing through the perceived attack, realizing it's not attack, not taking purposely, not taking it personally, not taking it like taking it as an attack, and coming from love rather than the fear escalating.
That's right. The only way you can come from a place of love, though, is if you can breathe through that initial overwhelm, that initial stress, and that initial fear. That's automatic for us. And so you've got to be able to breathe in the presence of that initial threat.
Wow.
And then my belief, Simon, is that parents are wonderfully and beautifully equipped to come up with the right solution for the problem. They have all the answers. They have all the answers, and there's no mental health professional is going to give a parent an answer that the parent doesn't already have within them. They just have to calm their brains down so their thinking can come online, and they can rely on that, their understanding of their child, their love for their child, and the relationship with their child, and they'll work through any situation. There may be situations where parents need support, but that support should only be in helping them understand themselves better so they can understand their child better.
Wow, powerful stuff, my friend. Powerful stuff.
Thank you, sir.
What would you like to call this episode, Bryan?
From fear to love.
Okay. And did you say 500,000 copies of that book?
feartolovebook.com. Yeah, people can actually get it for free. All they have to do is pay shipping and handling. Now, for the UK, the shipping is a lot more expensive. Yeah, they really want to get you guys on that. So maybe you can find it for free. Post Institute, we have a ton of stuff for free. On my Bryan Post YouTube channel, we have a ton of stuff for free. Post Institute on Facebook. I did 2 years of daily videos. I just don't pay for anything. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've been recording a lot of it. So there is so much available that parents can access it. You don't have to pay a dime. You just have to commit the time and the energy and the willingness to go and study, and it will revolutionize your life.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot. So check out those links. There'll be I'll put the links in the show notes, listeners, and I'll speak to you all again very soon. Thank you, Bryan. You've been an absolute star. You've really helped me. All the stuff that's coming back to me, actually, I was actually thinking about, I talked about fighting. All the stuff came from me. It's like fights I had with kids when I was like 10, 11, 12, like going to the youth club. And I just saw, I saw it so clearly through that, and trauma responses to that. And even a disagreement that we're having with a contractor at the moment.
Yeah, there you go.
So I don't feel safe with the guy. Yeah. He doesn't do what he says he's going to do.
Yeah, and then you get to make that decision. You honor yourself, and you make the decision that makes you feel best, and that's okay.
Thanks, buddy. Thanks, listeners.
Okay.
See you soon. Bye. Bye.